Thank you very much. You will notice that it doesn't sound like an Australian accent. So I've been in Melbourne for almost 23 years now, but I haven't lost the accent. So it's just one of the things that happens. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about using app config. And it's been one of the kind of pet projects I've had for the last couple of years because I go into clients and I have to hunt around to find the configuration where they've deployed and all that kind of information. So I'm going to show you how to use app config to solve those problems. A few of my details there if you need to get a hold of me. I'm just waiting. BizTalk goes away, then my Twitter tag's not good anymore, but still around for the moment, so we're good. I've been a BizTalk MVP since 2004, so I've been doing this way too long. So what we're going to talk about with app config today is kind of what is app config? Why do I want to use app config? Why not just use Key Vault? Everybody's used Key Vault for a lot of things. Using app config with a logic app in consumption. Using app config with logic app standard, which is a lot easier. Using it with the Azure Functions, both the in-process and the isolated. And then the big one that I use a lot is with DevOps. Being able to basically pull that information of where is my function host, where is my logic app standard host at, where's my storage account, all those kind of things, where's my API management, all of those kind of things in there. And a little bit on the local dev and test. My account that I primarily use in Azure is in 25 clients. So it kind of goes through a little bit of a trying to log me onto 25 clients every time I want to test locally. So I'll show you the easy way around that. Okay, so app config, it's not been around that long in Azure, but basically it provides a central location to put all of your app configuration. And you can add labels to it so that you can have your dev, test, UAT, prod. It's a little bit more fun when you have those in different subscriptions, but it will work. And I've got examples of that working. And basically, it also has a feature for feature flags. I'm not going to be talking about that today. I'm just going to be talking about the configuration side of things. And again, I like it because it's one central place. I go to a configuration, I can look at all of the settings for all of the environments and figure out why something's broke. Then going into DevOps and the different key vaults. So I put all of my deployment information in there. And then if I'm doing EDI or anything like that, I usually have information that's static configuration. So the IDs for the trading partners, the URLs for the trading partners, and all that kind of stuff. So there's some static information. One thing I will tell you, I am going to publish out, or I have published out, a GitHub repository with all of my samples in it from this talk that I'll point you to at the end. And it basically shows you even how to insert those static values with the bicep template. So if you look here, you can see that these are some sample settings inside of app config. We've got a key, we've got a value, we've got a label, and we've got a last modified. So you'll notice that there is a demo label, because that's the environment that I'm testing in. There's a local label there for when I'm doing local dev and test, so I can give it different values. You can also notice that there's no label, because that's going to be that value across all of my environments. I don't have to repeat it for each one. And then at the bottom, you'll notice something that I'll talk about a bit more in a minute. It's a reference to Key Vault, so that you don't have to know where your value's at. You go to app config, you either get it from app config or it gets it from Key Vault for you. So you don't have to worry about deciding where to go get the value from. again, then why not just use Key Vault? And I guess the biggest thing from a security point of view for me is not everything's a secret. And people need to see it. So if you put it all in Key Vault, you're giving everybody access to Key Vault. That defeats the purpose of the secret. So you need to do that. Sorry, that's a little bit small there, but we'll get into a demo that's a little bit, but basically it's just the fact that the value that's in Key Vault is a reference to the Key Vault. And it's a little bit funny. When you create the value in app config, you can put the URI that points to Key Vault, but if you don't put the content type, it doesn't show up as a Key Vault reference. So it's if you want to do it through like a bicep template, you need to have that content type. So I try not to do anything by hand. I've got bicep templates to do pretty much everything I want to do. Then the way I approach, I have one app config for all my environments, and I have a Key Vault for each environment. Because typically the secrets for a production environment, there's very few people that can see those secrets. Dev and test, completely different story. More people are going to be able to see those secrets. You want to separate those secrets. Your security people will be a lot happier because they're probably the ones that have access to those secrets in prod, but they don't really care as much about the other environments. Any questions? Okay. So basically, next we're going to move on to Logic Apps consumption. So not as good a story for app config in consumption. Number one, there's a Key Vault connector. There's not an app config connector. But I actually have never used the Key Vault connector either. And why haven't I used the Key Vault connector? It didn't support managed identity to start with. And I want to use managed identity because I don't want to have to mess with keys. So that's the one thing is with the HTTP calling off to the app config, you can use the managed identity. The only thing you've got to do is kind of set that the authentication or the audience so it gets the right token. And in the demos, I've got even an additional one. If I have a Logic App consumption that calls off to app config to get a value that's in Key Vault, it returns me the reference to Key Vault instead of the value. So you do have to check it a little bit so that when you get that back, you need to then use that URI to call into Key Vault and bring the value back. So it's not as easy as it could be, but it does work. The other thing I do, if they're fairly static values in the consumption, I use the token replace in my DevOps so that when I'm deploying that JSON file that is the Logic Apps consumption, I replace those parameter values in that JSON as part of my DevOps process. So it sets those, especially if it's things like, in this case, you'll notice there's a parameter for app config URL. That's going to be different in each, that'll be static across all the environments, but there's other URLs that I'm going to be using that are unique to each environment, so I use that token replace inside of the JSON file. And that's actually pretty easy because if you use the bicep and use a separate JSON definition file, it pulls that into your bicep. And then when I do a kind of a build on that creates the ARM JSON. And then in my release pipeline, I just run the token replacer across that ARM JSON file. And it picks up the hash curly brace value in there. The good thing is Logic App Standard is better support, but it is a little bit convoluted. So you can see that one of the new things they've done in the last 6 months is enabled the Microsoft.appconfig in the site configuration. So when you have your static for either, this could be functions or Logic App Standard, you can use the @Microsoft App Config, give it your endpoint, give it the value, give it the label, and it just comes in just like it's a normal variable in your configuration. And then inside of the parameter section, you point to say, okay, we want to use app settings. So that ties it to the value above. And then in the parameter settings, it basically has that value in there. So it goes from the app settings through the parameters into the actual parameter in the Logic app. So that's the way it works with the Logic apps. You will see when I go to functions in a minute, it's a whole lot easier process because it's just built better the way it does the variables and settings. So the other thing I do also in Logic App Standard, I do the same kind of token replace. If I got something that I want to know where the storage account for my test environment is, I just replace the URL in there and don't go through the whole parameter side of things. So this is a little bit small, but I'll get to a demo. But basically, with our Azure Functions, let me go. With the Azure Functions, we bring in, let's just go there. I bring in 3 settings from the either local settings or the JSON. My app config endpoint, my app config environment, so dev, test, prod, UAT. The last one is for your local testing. It's the Visual Studio Tenant ID. So if you have your account like my account that's in a bunch of different tenants, that narrows down which tenant it's going to try to log on to. And basically makes it work. With mine, I never could get the local debugging to working until I found that Visual Studio Tenant ID. And if you look at the little bit of code there, if you don't supply a Visual Studio Tenant ID, it won't put it in when it tries to open the default credentials. It'll just use like the managed ID or whatever that you've already got in there. Then what you can do is that you can, you basically tell it, I want to add app config, so I give it the app config endpoint. I also want to be able to have the pass-through into Key Vault, so I do have to give it the credentials for Key Vault. But again, as part of my bicep, when I created the function or the Logic app, I've already set the role properties to say that this Logic app or this function has a reader role into app config and a reader role into Key Vault, so that I don't have to have keys or anything that I manage. It's all done based on the managed identity. And then the next one is that I've got 2 filters. I load any value from app config that doesn't have a label, so has a null label, so it's a global setting. And then I load the particular environment. So the reason I do it in that order is that if I do happen to have a global setting that for this particular environment I have overridden, it will override when it loads that second app config environment. And all of this sets for the function that is an in process, it sets in your startup.cs. And then you set the function startup tag at the top there to make sure that that runs when it starts the function app. Now, as we move more to the .NET Core stuff and the in-process side of things, it's different. It basically, actually, where's my... Okay, I'm having the same thing as Elder. Yep. There we go. Isolated. So the difference in isolated is that this code is now in program.cs. That startup doesn't really exist in the isolated process. But you're doing exactly the same thing. It's just a different place to put it. You've got the same Git environment variables for your app config endpoint, your app config environment, and your Visual Studio tenant ID. And then down in there, you're doing the same thing of getting the endpoint, the credentials, the Key Vault credentials, and the filtering. One thing I haven't covered in this talk is that you can set a reload parameter in app config. So what you can do is if a value is changed, it will force the application to reload the app config without stopping and starting the application. So if you have values that change frequently, you can put those in and put those in there. But you do, when you go to get those, you need to check and see if you need to do a reload. So I haven't used it that much in most of the cases because typically a stop and start of the function app is not that big a deal in most cases. So I haven't put that in there. But again, like I said, we'll show the code in the demo of how it pulls the values back from it. So here's the piece for DevOps. There are 2 tasks that you can download from the marketplace. I still don't understand why they're in the marketplace and just not part of DevOps, but they are. And it always causes me issues at clients because I have to request them and then wait for the clients to put them into the space. The third one I use is that replace token. And that basically does anything that's in your DevOps variables, it looks for the hash curly bracket variable name curly bracket hash and then replaces it in whichever files you specify. In this particular DevOps, which is the one I used for these demos, I basically deploy the base ARM template. So it creates the storage accounts, it creates API management, it creates the hosts for the functions and the host for the logic app, those kind of things. And then basically, there are things that I don't want to put into app config that I just push out through the ARM output. So it does that. And then I run the app config both for the null and for the environment. Now, you can do, one of the guys I work with has done it to where you can do a really funky string in there and it will pull both the null and that. I like it to where I can see what it's doing a little bit easier than digging into it. So it's just the habit that I have. Then I use that replace token on the JSON file. So that's basically the bicep compiled into an ARM template. And then it goes and replaces any of those in. Because like if I do API management with a logic app, I need that URL template in my policy. So that policy gets pulled into the ARM template, and then I can replace it with the token replace. And then basically I'm deploying, in this example, I'm deploying the ARM template for the functions. I'm pulling the ARM template for the logic app consumption and the ARM template for the logic app standard. So I've got all those values that I need there. So the last one is that just a little bit of a reiteration on that before we get into the demo is that you do need that Visual Studio tenant ID when you want to do local debugging and testing. And you also can push into your local settings file those 3 values you see there, the app config endpoint, app config environment, and the Visual Studio tenant ID, so that they won't get pushed up when you do a build and they won't get pushed up into your deployment in Azure. Okay, so let's hop over to the demos. And how many people use the REST extension for Visual Studio Code? Yeah. I like it because I can actually put it into the code repository. And then that way, anybody that pulls the repository out can do testing on it. This particular case, I didn't get to the point where I've actually pushed them into API management. So I'm calling the logic apps and the functions directly. But I basically have here where the first one is our logic app. So if we do a send request, we'll see how happy the demo gods are. So it did work. So we've got test value 1 from app config. So what we can do is we can go in here to our app config, and Stefan talked about the cloud framework and the adoption framework. I actually, at the last minute, changed all the names to match the new abbreviations that Microsoft have published. So it's APPCS for app config. So if we go into app config, go into the Configuration Explorer, we can scroll down here and you can expand to basically pick up multiple environments. But we can go down here and look at our test value. So test value 1 for the demo environment is test value 1 from app config. And that's basically, if we go back to the run that we did, that basically is there. If we go back here now and go to the logic app consumption, we'll see that basically I just sent in an empty HTTP request to kick it off, and then it basically went off and picked up app config key value test 1. And then it does bring back more than just the value. So you do either have to use a parse or basically just hard code the link to bring back the actual value in there. And then basically all I'm doing is sending back the value. I was playing with some stuff here. This is basically a compose, and I'm pushing it into a log analytics custom table so that we can do reporting on it later on if we wanted to. So that's basically the logic app consumption version of this code. Let's go down here to the next one. Now this is the second one is basically I'm pulling in the Key Vault value. So let's go back and look at how we did that. Go our dashboard. And I've just got to find the other, I should have sorted these. Where's my other logic app? There it is. So this one is basically, it basically goes in and calls off and gets a app config, but what comes back in the value is the URI for the Key Vault, because it's a Key Vault value. So then basically what I do is I parse the JSON and grab the URI, and then I do a Key Vault call with that URI, and that brings back the value. So basically the value is test value 1 from app config referencing Key Vault. And basically that's what showed up in our response back. It is a little bit annoying that you have to do that second hop to go to Key Vault, But the alternative is you have to make a raw call to Key Vault anyway if it's a secret. So it makes it a little bit different. But then let's go to our Logic App standard. Okay, I've done something wrong. Let's go out here to the dashboard, Logic App standard. And most likely what I did is I deployed it. And then let's see, demo 1A, grab the URL. And let's try to call that now. Yes, test value from Key Vault. I've run into that a couple of times, so I was pretty close to the idea of what I'd done there. So what we could do in this one is we'll go in here and see the run history. Do a refresh. We won't see too much in this one because the thing is that that's already happened in the parameters. So if we go back into here, go to our configuration, and the Logic Apps standard, you don't have to do that double hop because it's already done it in the configuration. Because you see we've got test value 1 and test value 2. If we show the values, they're the @Microsoft app config pointing to the value in app config, and if that reference value is through to Key Vault, it'll go ahead and pull that back. So that's basically that, and then we can do the same. Most likely I have to grab the new URL from here and put it into the demo 2. And I should have taken the time to put it into API management because it shortens these URLs immensely. So let's go, send the request. So basically, test value 1 from app config referencing Key Vault in a Logic App standard. So the next one basically is we're looking at our functions. So the first one, it will be our in-process function. So if we run there and do a send request, so we get the same thing. I'll try to do the, I haven't tested it, I'll try to do the actual debugging on it and show you, because what it does, it actually, and this is a little bit of a side effect, when you hook it up to a function app, it will bring back everything with that label into your parameter or your configuration inside of your function app. So you may want to, even though it's in the same environment, you may want to have different keys so that you can bring back just the values for that function app. But it's just so much easier because basically you don't have to worry about all the values you're going to go after. And it even supports, and this is, let's go down to the third one, I think is the one I've got. Let's do a send request. You can do configuration sections. So when you put them into app config, you put them in with a colon, and that gets converted. So let's go here, go back to the dashboard, go to our Configuration Explorer, go to values, and so you'll see I've got section colon value 1, section colon value 2, section colon value 3, and you can actually in your code get back the section. And let's go, and we might as well go to our logic in process. Oh, it's the only thing annoying about it when you've got a window. So let's go back up to. So basically in this one, you load a configuration section, and then you can go through each value of that. Because a lot of times if you're connecting, I've done it before, if I'm connecting to AD, I've got a client ID, a client secret, and things like that I want in a section, and I bring that all in. And you can do that through the app config the same way. And the thing is you have, in Key Vault, you'll have like the client ID, but the client secret will be in Key Vault. So it'll still have that reference, so it's in Key Vault. So it's protected at a bit more level. Let's go. The last thing I will do is let's go look at the DevOps. Actually, the first thing we'll look at is go back into our app config. And you'll notice that basically I have my API management identity. I have my API management name, resource group. I've got the logger name. So I've got everything I've deployed into this environment is in app config so that I know exactly where it's at. I can use it to deploy other things because basically all I do is in my DevOps is I go pull it out. And it injects it as in variables. It's interesting. I've done some of them with an underscore and some of them with a dash. I just found out that I was looking through it going, you need to be consistent. But the thing is there's our URLs. So if I want to put those into API management, that URL templates are all in there that I just pick it up. I can do a token replace, push that policy into API management. The only thing that's not really in there is Key Vault, or the app config, because there's no use having app config inside of app config because you got to find it. So you end up having, in your DevOps, the only thing you end up having is the variable. Let's look at this guy. So pretty much the only thing in my release, I probably just put it into the, no, I put it in, no, I may have hard coded this particular one, but typically what I'll do is put it in a library that's global, and then it uses it for all the pipelines. But you can see I've got the demo one that deploys all of the main resources, and then I've got the logic app consumption, the functions, the logic app standard all in there. And then we can look at the, back in here, I've also got a bicep template for the static values. And basically all it is the bicep to create a value in app config. And I typically, that's not part of the pipeline that runs every time. I run it once. And I run it once in each new environment with the values that I want for that environment. So all of this is going to be, let me go back to the slides real quick. And go next, actually go back to. So that top link in there, GitHub, BizTalk Bill, Azure App Config Talk, shouldn't be too hard to find. So, and that's got all of that source. The only thing I need to do yet is I'm going to update the README file of how I deploy that in the release pipelines. The YAML to do the conversion of the bicep to the JSON, the ARM JSON is in the code. So that that YAML file's there. It's just how I'm doing the deployment's not there. This is also some of the quick starts that you can find out there for app config for all of the different permutations and combinations of functions you may want to write. So you've got Python, you've got JavaScript, .NET Framework, .NET Core, all of those kind of things. And again, this will all be available. Any questions? So feel free to catch up with me later on if you've got questions about it. Any questions about the code. Bill at BizTalkBill is the easiest way to remember, at least. So thank you very much.